In the second process of photosynthesis, the Calvin cycle, we actually begin to produce our sugars. During the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is incorporated into organic molecules. The carbon in that carbon dioxide molecule is reduced by adding electrons when bonds are formed between carbon molecules. Remember, electrons that are going to do the reducing are loaded onto NADPH in those light reactions, and then energy for the actual building of those sugar molecules is going to come from ATP. We're all done with light at this point. We don't need any more light for this process to occur. Light reactions still continue in the mitochondria during the day, but the actual mechanism of the Calvin cycle doesn't require any more light. So sometimes they're called the dark reactions, but we're going to call it the Calvin cycle. These dark reactions actually occur simultaneously with the light reactions if we're talking about a type of photosynthesis called C3 photosynthesis. This will become important in the next video when we talk about a couple of different variations on photosynthesis. As soon as the light reactions begin to produce ATP and NADPH in the daytime, the Calvin cycle fires up and really happens concurrently all day long as the cell is exposed to sunlight. So the actual product of the Calvin cycle is not glucose. And I know I say it sometimes in the video, and it's a hard habit to break because the overall chemical formula is written as carbon dioxide and water produces glucose. And the reason that we say that is it makes a nice balanced chemical equation, and because glucose is a really common sugar molecule found in the cells. But in reality, the end product of the Calvin cycle is a molecule called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. This G3P molecule is then converted into a variety of different molecules. Basically, whatever carbon skeleton the cell needs can be made from G3P. So we actually saw this molecule during cellular respiration. It was one of the midway products in glycolysis. So glucose is broken down into pyruvate in that process, but one of the intermediate steps is this G3P molecule. So the cell can use this to make starch, glucose, sucrose, basically any sort of carbohydrate that the cell might need. So here's an overview of our Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle requires carbon dioxide. That's going to be the backbone of the G3P molecule. It requires 9 ATP and 6 NADPH. So it requires a lot of energy and a lot of electrons to produce these sugar molecules from the carbon dioxide. The output is 1 G3P molecule. Which doesn't really seem like a lot. There's actually 6 produced in this cycle, but 5 of them stay and are just used to regenerate some of the molecules, just like the citric acid cycle. It's used to regenerate and continue moving and continue turning to keep the process in the cell going. So you can see here that the Calvin cycle is labeled with 3 different phases. We've got the first stage, the carbon fixation. Remember, carbon fixation is using or is incorporating carbon into a biologically useful molecule. The second stage is reduction. So that is where we're actually going to add some electrons into the carbon backbone, and then we're ultimately going to make a molecule of G3P. The rest of those G3 molecules are going to be recycled and they go back into or continue on in the Calvin cycle, and so that carbon fixation can continue. So let's look a little bit more detail at this Calvin cycle. So phase 1 is carbon fixation. Just like the citric acid cycle, don't really expect you to know all of the intermediates, but I do expect you to know the important ones. So in the Calvin cycle, 3 carbon dioxide enter for every turn of the cycle. Carbon dioxide enters, it combines with a molecule called rubisco and produces a very short-lived 6-carbon molecule. That carbon dioxide rubisco compound is really unstable, and so it immediately breaks into a precursor to G3P called 3-phosphoglycerate. In the second phase of the Calvin cycle, the molecules in the 3-phosphoglycerate are sort of moved around and changed a little bit using energy and using electrons. And then ultimately we produce 6 G3Ps from this. So remember, 3 carbon dioxides came in, they combined to produce a molecule called rubisco, and then ultimately our goal is the production of G3P. This is a reduction reaction because we're adding electrons into that molecule. We're adding energy. Remember, this is an anabolic reaction, so we're storing energy in those G3P bonds. That G3P can then go on to make glucose and any other organic compound. But each turn of this cycle only produces 1 net G3P. So only 1 G3P comes out. The other 5 are used to regenerate a molecule called RUBP. So this final phase, this regeneration of RUBP, requires a little bit of energy, and it is the RUBP molecule that's going to be used to produce, or that's going to combine with carbon dioxide to produce that rubisco molecule. So this, as long as there is carbon dioxide coming into the cell, as long as there's ATP, and as long as there's NADPH, this cycle is going to continue for as long as the light reactions are going. If you turn to page 177 in your textbook, there's a really nice overview of the importance of photosynthesis. I would really like you to read this and understand it. Because it connects basically this whole unit, even actually more than this unit, chapters 3 through 8. But just as a quick overview, photosynthesis is really important, not only because it provides all of the chemical energy for life on Earth, but it also is part of the carbon cycle. So in the carbon cycle, carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere. It's put into this G3P, which is then used to make molecules for the plants. Consumers eat the plants, and so that carbon is transferred all throughout the global ecosystem. When organisms die, that carbon is then released back into the soil and into the atmosphere, and can be incorporated again at some point in photosynthesis. So not only is photosynthesis and respiration linked via carbon dioxide and oxygen, but this whole process of the carbon cycle is really important for photosynthesis and cellular respiration as well. And in our in-class assignment, we're going to look at that carbon cycle just a little bit. So, as a summary of photosynthesis, for our light reactions, we put in sunlight energy. Tons and tons of sunlight energy every day is absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules on Earth, which means there's a lot of ATP being produced, and a lot of NADPH being produced. All of that ATP and NADPH goes into the Calvin cycle, where we require some carbon dioxide, and we output that G3P molecule. That G3P molecule is then starting material for a variety of metabolic pathways in an organism that synthesizes important organic molecules.